Evening and welcome to the Network for Responsible Public Policy. I'm Jenny Wilson, a trustee of NFRPP. We're so happy that you've joined us tonight. If you've been with us before, you know that the Network for Responsible Public Policy connects people with thought leaders who educate and inspire. Tonight, our good friend and New York Times opinion writer, Peter Coy, is back. Peter is joined by Laurence Kotlikoff to discuss a purple agenda for the next 4 years. Larry has written 19 books, including Money Magic, An Economist's Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. Larry's a professor of economics at Boston University and the president of Economic Security Planning, Inc. If you're new to NFRPP, please visit our website, nfrpp.org, to learn more about our programs. You'll also find our speakers' full bios. We welcome your questions. Please type them in the Q&A box. Peter and Larry will respond to as many as possible. Welcome back, Peter, and welcome to the Network for Responsible Public Policy, Larry. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks for having me.
I think Larry's got to point out that he's actually written 21 books, not 19. Keeps adding. Can't stop the guy. So Larry and I have known each other for many years, and I've interviewed him many times and continue to interview him because he's a wealth of knowledge on a lot of different economic topics, not just retirement, intergenerational accounting, and federal budgets and social security, many, many other things. So he's well qualified to answer almost any question the audience members have about the economy and personal finance. And so, Larry, I'm really happy to have you on. And I think because this is an election year, I want to ask a little bit about politics, and especially not so much straight politics, because I'm not going to ask you about who's ahead in the polls, but really more policy, which you have some strong views on. So before I delve into any particular questions, is there anything you kind of want to start out by saying?
Well, it's delightful to be with you, Peter. You know, we're good friends. We've been talking to each other for probably 30, 40 years, I don't know. And you're throughout our, mutual careers about economics. And I have to tell everybody that I think you're the top economics reporter in the country and probably the world, because you actually do your homework. You read economists' work. You look at the new latest research coming out of the National Bureau of Economic Research. Almost anybody in economics is a member of the National Bureau, and you keep abreast of this, and you come up with all kinds of interest. You actually delve in, read people's work, and you start asking penetrating questions, and then you go talk to other people, get other opinions. So you're the real deal. So I'm so excited to be with you again.
Well, it's very nice of you, Barry. I'm getting messages from the audience that my audio is breaking up. I don't know what to do about that. Apologize. We'll be working on behind the scenes to straighten that out, but I'm just going to continue for now, jump into some questions. So the headline on their talk, Larry, is the purple agenda for the next 4 years. So really, what is the purple agenda? Just broadly speaking, before I get into any specifics.
So, one of the things that I have done in my day is actually run for president. As you know, I ran as a write-in candidate in 2016. So I actually went and collected signatures. You have to be, Mickey Mouse can't win as a write-in candidate, turns out. Mickey has to collect signatures, a different number in different states. In Tennessee, you have to go to each of the different counties in Tennessee and get signatures. So each state has its different rules. In Colorado, you can just sign up and be on the ballot, actually on the ballot, but otherwise you're a write-in candidate if you get enough signatures. To be actually on the ballot nationwide, you have to set up basically your own party, and it would cost about $70 million to collect the number of votes to be on the ballot. So like California, you need like 500,000 votes. So this is why RFK is not on the ballot, I think, in more than 12 states. But anyway, why did I run as as a write-in candidate in 2016 against Clinton and Trump? And I was actually, one of the 5 people that could actually become president back then. But I didn't have, uh, I really didn't think that the chance of um, getting traction was very high. But I thought it was important for an economist to lay out who is not a red or a blue, but really a purple in the middle, uh, what economists think we should do to fix all our problems. And I'm talking about healthcare, where we still have probably 30 million people uninsured, a Byzantine system costing 18%, 19% of GDP, getting awful results, the tax system, which is a complete disaster, not generating enough revenue, uh, fiscal policy that's not sustainable, imposing massive burdens on future generations via its Ponzi scheme nature, with all kinds of off the books liabilities, Social Security beyond broke, the banking system ready to fail at any moment again, like it did in 2008, almost failed a year ago when Silicon Valley Bank went under. So all these things need to be fixed. Education system is. So I figured I should talk to other economists, get our opinions, and put together a platform. And maybe the press would actually take a look and have a serious discussion with me, and give me some press attention, and get this. And maybe the campaign would take off, but at a minimum, I would have a policy book. And there's a book that I took my platform and I transformed it into a book called You're Hired, not You're Fired, but You're Hired. It's on my website at kotlikoff.net. Anybody can download it for free. And you'll see exactly in all the policies that we economists think should be adopted. None of them are more than 10 bullets long. So we can fix everything in very simple terms, essentially overnight. And the President Biden could do that starting today, or if he's reelected, and President Trump could do it if he's reelected. So this was why I ran. I wanted to get across the purple agenda, but a real agenda. What we have here right now is politicians who have no agenda. And I also had to talk about, foreign policy in this book and other issues like abortion, because I felt it was important to state my views on everything. But I think they're kind of moderate, middle of the, technocratic views of how to fix things, because that's really, we have to do radical things. They might be in the kind of moderate in some sense, because they're not fully, they're not left wing or right wing, but they are radical reforms that we need to undertake to get this country heading back in the right direction, because it's really sliding downhill.
Well, let's delve into some of your ideas. There's so many different ones, but maybe start with Social Security. What would you do differently about Social Security? What's wrong with what we're doing now, and how would you change it?
Okay, Social Security is, according to the trustees report that just came out a couple weeks ago, it's $63 trillion in the red. That's more than 2 years of more than 2 times official debt. So this off the book debt that Social Security has, which is really equivalent and can be compared with the official debt, the unfunded liability, it's recorded in table 6F1. It's Roman 6F1. Anybody can go find a 2024 trustees report, $63 trillion unfunded liability. That's all. You take all the projected benefits the actuaries are projecting, subtract all the projected receipts, taxes, and also the trust fund, put everything into present value, $63 trillion. Our GDP is about $25 trillion. So this is astronomical problem, far beyond what's been advertised to the public. So the system is being run as a Ponzi scheme, has from the beginning. The money's coming in from young workers, given over immediately to old people. There's never been a real trust fund. The trust fund's been a bank account to take the money in and hand it out. It's never amounted to anything much. And so, you can promise people benefits, but if there aren't younger people paying enough taxes because they're not earning enough money, because we have had slow productivity growth, dramatically lower than in the last century for sure, in parts of the last century and the prior century, and population growth declining compared to the baby boom period, then you've got a problem. You've got, this is Bernie Madoff all over again. But it's not all over again. It started under Eisenhower. He jacked up the system, and then you had, each, successive presidents. They weren't all Democrats, all Republicans. Nixon double indexed the system. So and then we've expanded the benefits. Now, we need Social Security, but we don't need a system that's going to drive our kids bankrupt, leave a massive burden for them to pay our benefits. And then the other thing is that the system was designed about 88 years ago, and it's completely out of date. It's got 20 extremely sexist provisions. It's got 12 benefits, 2,728 rules about those benefits in its handbook. And according to Social Security, 22,000 pages in its program operating manual system about the 2,728 rules about the 12 benefits. So what we need to do is honor the benefits that we are obligated to pay off our accrued benefits, but shut down the program, retire Social Security immediately, fill in zeros in people's earnings records going forward, and then cut the payroll tax and have it gradually decline and have that pay off the accrued liabilities. So everybody who's currently retired will get everything they're currently getting. Everybody's close to retirement would get all their accrued benefits. Wouldn't be a little bit less than what they might otherwise project, but they're also paying somewhat less taxes in the next near future. But then I would replace this with what I call the personal security account system, which is here's the design. Unless you want me to take a breath here.
Yeah, why don't we take a breath, because you're about to get into a little layer of detail, and I want to back up and hit some of the high points. First of all, the point that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. Well, in the way you're defining a Ponzi scheme, society as a whole is a Ponzi scheme, because there'll always be the case that the young are taking care of the old, and then they become old, and the next generation of young comes along. So that concept, while we technically call it a Ponzi scheme, is sort of just the way civilization works, right?
No, not really. If you go to Singapore, well, I mean, you are right insofar as we always have, obligations into the future, and we have revenues coming from current generations and future generations. And so what economists do to see whether fiscal policy is sustainable without raising the fiscal burden, the taxes on our kids dramatically, is to do fiscal gap accounting. And that's basically making this calculation that Social Security is making, just looking at all the outlays and all the receipts and seeing whether they balance in present value. And the rest of our fiscal system is in worse shape than Social Security. So the rest of it can't bail. So we have a fiscal system that is insolvent, where the fiscal gap is enormous, and we need to basically raise every single tax by about 40% to cover the outlays that the CBO is projecting. They just came out the other day with projections of official debt going up to over 150% of GDP. So I'm not saying anything that doesn't connect directly to the CBO numbers. The fiscal gap I've calculated is based on the CBO's numbers. So take a country like Singapore. If you do the fiscal gap accounting for Singapore, it's going to be negative because they haven't left big burdens for the next generation. They have a fully funded pension system, so they don't have trillions of dollars of debt for their kids to cover. The unfunded liability in their system is negative. and it's been a fully funded system from the beginning. Other things are in good shape, so that their country is not on a trajectory where we're going to have to raise taxes on our kids by at least 40%. Every single federal tax stream of revenue has got to be 40% higher. That's the current situation that none of the politicians are talking about. But all you have to do is play with it, grab Excel, grab the CBO's projections. You can do this fiscal gap accounting, and this connects to something called generational accounting, which is something I and Alan Auerbach and Jagdish Gokhale, another economist student of mine, developed, which is, we're asking, if we don't get current generations to help pay off this fiscal gap, what's the burden going to be on everybody coming, all the kids born today and in the future? And it's going to be astronomical. So,
can I stop you again,
that's
Larry?
a Ponzi scheme, Peter. That's, effectively, that's screwing our children. And maybe, yes, you could say every country's got a time path of receipts and a time path of expenditures, but some countries have a time path of fiscal policy that's sustainable. Others are on a trajectory where they're going to have to bankrupt their children to pay off the obligation. That's the one we're on. Singapore is not.
So who feels the pain under your system? You said current retirees are protected. Also, people near retirement are still going to get the full benefits as projected.
Yes, everybody who's near, because everybody's going to get their benefits based on their earnings history up till the date of the reform, and then we're going to have zeros filled in. So it's very easy transition. So somebody like my 35-year-old son is going to, when he gets to retirement age, he'll get some benefits based on his contributions up to age 35 under the current system. But then he'll be forced to contribute 10% of his pay, which will then be divided half and half, and half will go into his wife's account and half will go into his account. If he were a low earner, the government would make a matching contribution. If he were disabled or unemployed, the government would make matching contributions to make the system progressive. But the contribution sharing, so that each spouse puts half and half into each person's account, means if they split up, they each have the same size account. So that's, because one person might be staying home to watch the kids in order to let the other person pursue their career. So this is modern. This is not a sexist system I'm talking about. And then all the money would be collectively, everybody's contributions would be collectively invested in a single index fund of all the world's stocks and bonds and real estate funds. So this would be a global market weighted index. This is very much what Singapore has done. Force people to save, put it into a Singapore fund, and then invested it collectively so that everybody gets the same return. So what I'm proposing is a system where Wall Street has nothing to do with it at all. My little laptop here that I'm talking to you from, it's a Apple Air, would run the entire system. I mean, anybody's laptop could do it at no cost. And so everybody would be in this diversified portfolio in terms of their contributions. That would be fully funded because the money would be, you'd have your account and I'd have my account, but it'd be invested the same way. The government would guarantee that we'd, at retirement age, at least get back what we put in adjusted for inflation. So we'd have a zero real return guarantee. And that's, very conservative. That certainly should happen in the world financial markets, delivering a zero real return. And then when people reach between the ages of 57 and 67, each cohort, as they age through those ages, would have their account balances collectively sold off and used to buy inflation index bonds. And then they would be paid annuities starting at age 62, with all their annuities coming to them by 67 in the form of inflation indexed streams of money. because there'd be these inflation index bonds backing them.
Okay,
So this is a
time's on
fully,
to jump in, Larry, because we're
yeah,
getting a little bit into the weeds again. These are all certainly very important questions, but I just want to make sure we're not losing our audience. I do have one question here, came in from anonymous attendee. Does Singapore have the same tax breaks and loopholes for the wealthy that we have? And then I'll ask another question after you answer that one.
my guess is they don't. I don't know Singapore's all of Singapore's tax system. I know a little bit, something about their pension system. But you asked Peter who is going to get hurt from this
Yeah,
reform. I want to get back to that. So my son is going to have to pay payroll taxes at a lower level, and then they would decline through time to pay off these accrued liabilities, which are lower than the projected liabilities. But at least we would give my son and his generation uh, a system that was fully funded, that made sense, that didn't have a zillion rules that nobody could understand, uh, and that was equitable and progressive. And he would get something back for sure, instead of being sucked into the system for years longer, promised benefits that cannot be paid. So the benefits, the current trustees are saying that in just 10 years, we're going to have a 24% benefit cut because the cash flow is coming, the system will run out of money on a cash flow basis. Now, they're not likely to cut benefits if they keep the old system, the current system, by 24%, because the people getting checks are the ones who vote. They're not working, they're retired mostly, and on election day, they have nothing better to do than to vote. That's why politicians are so concerned about, Social Security being the third rail. So what's likely to happen is they're probably going to raise the taxation of the benefits and maybe increase my son and your son's retirement age. They're going to cut the benefits of our kids in surreptitious ways. And one way that's happening right now is that, I don't know how many of the listeners, the viewers here know this, but our Social Security benefits are subject to federal income tax if a measure of our income, which is our modified adjusted gross income plus half of our Social Security benefit, exceeds a threshold, and then there's another threshold. In between these two thresholds, you're having to pay 50 cents on the Social Security dollar. That becomes taxable. And then if this measure goes beyond the second threshold, 85 cents of every dollar that you receive in Social Security gets to become taxable income as that number gets bigger. So it's a very complicated scheme, but the thresholds are not indexed for inflation. So this was put into place in 1983 by David Stockman. All our kids are going to end up paying, because of the non-indexation of these thresholds, your son, my son, they're going to be paying taxes on 85% of their Social Security benefits. And that's not the case for us. We're paying a smaller share of our Social Security benefits in taxes because not all of our income is above the threshold yet. So this is the kind of thing that's underlying the way we're dealing with the next generation. We're surreptitiously using inflation to raise their taxes, and it's still not enough. We're still beyond broke as a country.
right. Okay, so I want to remind the audience that Larry's open for questions, and he has opinions on a lot of different topics. We've only scratched the surface here, so please enter your questions in the Q&A function. Another question we have from this anonymous attendee is, do the projections take into account the passing away of the boomer generation?
The what?
The passing away of the boomer generation.
Oh yeah, these projections I'm talking about for Social Security that are in Table 6F1 in the trustees report, which are, that's in the appendix of the report. The trustees have pushed away in the appendix. They don't even discuss this massive unfunded liability that's been getting bigger every basically over the last decade or so. It's increased by about $15 trillion, much faster than the official debt. And it certainly takes into account all the demographics. This is being produced by the actuaries of Social Security. Steve Goss is the chief actuary, a long-term friend of mine. They're doing it very carefully, and nobody's paying any attention because we have 535 members of Congress. Not one of them has a PhD in economics, and they don't seem to care about what happens to our kids. That's the basic story here. We have politicians who care only about themselves, about the next election, not the next generation.
How do you feel about funding Social Security benefits from general tax revenue, not just payroll tax revenue?
Well, to a certain extent, we already are because, as I said, a increasing amount of our Social Security benefits are subject to federal income taxation. So, yes, would it be more progressive to rather than raising the payroll well, if we can raise the payroll tax, which is now 12.4%. We could increase, it's limited to up to $165,000. So we could eliminate that ceiling. That would be very progressive because only high earners would be paying this payroll tax, this additional 12.4% on their pay that they're not paying now. So that's not using the federal income tax, but it is a progressive way to get more revenue into the system. We could also just raise the federal income tax rates or the highest bracket. So there's lots of things we can do. The thing we have to realize is that our fiscal system has a lot of taxes, has a lot of programs. We have about 1,000 fiscal programs in our country. How could that possibly be 1,000 fiscal programs? Well, everybody's familiar with the federal income tax and the corporate income tax. And we have 42 state income taxes, including DC. We also have about 45 or so state sales taxes. But we also have every state, including DC, 51 states, including DC, has their own Medicaid program with its own provisions about if you earn too much money, you lose that benefit. Food stamps, if you earn too much money, you lose food stamps, 22 cents on the dollar. You could lose the earned income tax credit, 20 cents on the dollar as part of the income tax. You can lose welfare benefits, housing support, child care support, child tax credits. So we have, in every state, we have a different fiscal system. But the main thing I'm trying to get across here, Peter, is that everybody, whether we're talking about the poor or the middle class or the rich, virtually everybody's in a very high marginal tax bracket. And among the poor, we have about a third of the poor, people in the lowest quintile of the income distribution, facing marginal tax rates above 60%. Because if they earn more money, they lose benefits like crazy. So what we're doing here as a country with our fiscal system, I'm not saying we don't need more revenue from it, we do, but we have to basically throw out what we've got and reform the fiscal system radically because we are locking the poor generation after generation into poverty with what we've got. And I did a study that you referenced, I think, in the New York Times. It's on my website under articles. It's called The Marginal Taxation of Americans' Labor Supply. It's joint with Alan Auerbach and who's at Berkeley, a professor of economics, and David Altick, who's a senior economist, I think the chief economist of the Atlanta Federal Reserve. The study was supported by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So, it's a legitimate, it's nobody's making up these numbers, but when you look at our fiscal system, when you look at the 1,000 programs that we've got, through this Webb telescope that we've developed with the Fed's help, with the Sloan Foundation's help, with the help of the National Institute of Health, actually, through time, you see a picture of a terrible system that is keeping people from working. So we have to have, what I would go for would be something like a negative income tax, which is categorical, different one for single people with kids, single people without kids, married people with kids, married people without kids. This is basically you get depending on your category, you get a certain amount of money, and then you pay about 30 cents on the dollar. Everybody would be in the same marginal tax bracket. That kind of reform could raise revenue, give everybody the same incentive to work, be more progressive than we currently have, and not be locking one generation after the next of poor people into poverty and telling.
Larry, let me stop you there for a second. I want to come back to this, but I want to get into a couple of questions from the audience. So Michael James says, this message about Social Security is a type of policy that would seem to sink any candidate's popularity. Social media is rampant with this young demographic that asks the question rightly of what's the point of working with no hope of access to affordable real estate like their parents and wages remain stagnant. What hope would you give this generation of new people joining or recently added to the workforce?
Okay, so we have this terrible fiscal problem. We have to fix, as I said, we have to fix our tax system in a way that gives everybody an incentive to work and doesn't lock the poor into poverty. We have to have a modern version of Social Security that's fully funded and stop digging a deeper fiscal hole for Social Security. But we also have to fix healthcare, because that's really our saving grace. We're spending about 19% of GDP on healthcare, and the rankings of our healthcare quality is 21st among nations. Sweden is spending 11%, not 19, 11% of GDP on healthcare and getting fourth best results. We're 19% getting 21st best results. So what if we adopted the Swedish healthcare system? There's nothing that says our healthcare expenditure won't go from 19 down to 11. It will. But I'm proposing something with other health economists, which is called the Better Care system, which is basically Medicare for all, but it's a Republican version of Medicare, and it's a much more regulated version of that. So we don't have Medicare Advantage plans that are ripping off seniors. But we do want to have a competitive healthcare system where you join a plan, you can change after a year, you can walk with your feet, and the plans are competing with each other, and we gradually get that. So my solution to the entire set of problems here is to come up with funding, come up with money to not have to have a draconian tax hike by fixing healthcare and getting everybody covered in a modern competitive healthcare system that is very similar to what they have in France and Germany and Sweden and Israel and Japan. And none of these countries are spending 19% of GDP and getting terrible results. So if we fix healthcare, we have 8 percentage points of GDP to use to not have to raise taxes to get that. That's basically the size of our fiscal gap right there. 8% of GDP forever. We do this reform of healthcare, we can basically, and also fix the tax system and fix Social Security. And then I would fix a few more things like the banking system, so we never have 2008 all over again. And then we've got a country that actually can take off for everybody.
Okay, Larry, this is good. I'm going to ask another audience question, and then I have one afterward. But Catherine Scott asks, any idea about where the impetus to change the fiscal system could come from? Clearly, no one in power has the motivation.
That's I think we have to in every opportunity we have with our politicians, tell them they have to get serious about fixing all of our institutions. And everybody could print out my book and mail it to their members of Congress. They could just print it out. It's about 100 pages. It's easy reading. There's 10 or so reforms. Each is about 10 bullets long. And if we just flood members of Congress with this book, we will get their attention. If they take it to the rallies for President Trump and President Biden and start waving it, press will start talking about it. So there are things we can do if we do this together. Now, will people actually go away from this webinar, this podcast, and actually go to kotlikoff.net, download your Hired, read it. If you like it, send it to your congressman. I hope you will. Go to Staples, get it printed, put it in the mail. Let's get thousands of people to send this to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let's see if she can read. I'm not sure she can read, given the kinds of things she says, to tell you the truth. And I'm not sure some of the Democrats can read or are willing to read. But if they get enough copies of this book, somebody in their office will read them, and that might get Marjorie Taylor Greene to start talking about something beyond herself and talk about these real problems that our country has, and maybe turn her future around so that she becomes a serious representative of our country, because everybody has a chance to change their future. We're not locked into being a mindless politician.
Okay, I want to keep asking you sort of a high level question. You talk about a purple agenda where the Democrats are blue, Republicans are red. What do you like about the red agenda? What do you like about the blue agenda? And what do you dislike about each one? That's why you come up with purple agenda.
Well, I dislike both of their agendas because they're not looking at the reality of what we're facing to a large extent, especially in the fiscal side. They're not looking at the biggest problem we're facing, which is insolvency. We are on a path like Argentina started out on 100 years ago. They had 85% of our per capita GDP they had back in 1920. Today, they're at 14% of our per capita GDP. So countries can go downhill gradually over a century, and that's what we're doing. You can see this in so many different places. We have National Science Foundation that can't fund basic research. We have education that's getting worse and worse in terms of the international test scores. We have all kinds of infrastructure that's starting to get repaired, but is there really enough money there? We have education system that is failing our kids in terms of paying teachers hardly even a living wage. So we don't have the resources because we're wasting our money. So we have to. So I need so now in terms of what I like about the Reds have some realization that you can't tax people at a 70% rate and expect them to work. You can't put them in a 70% marginal tax bracket and expect the rich to work, let alone the poor. The Blues, I like for the fact that they know that the billionaires, the super rich, aren't paying a penny in taxes because they're just borrowing for consumption against their capital gains and not realizing any of their appreciated stock, selling those and having to pay capital gains taxes. And then they pass away and they give the stocks to their kids and they pay off the debts. This is the way the super rich pay no taxes. So we need to have a whole new tax system. I did talk about the negative income tax as one idea, but I would actually prefer a progressive personal cash flow consumption tax so that the rich would pay taxes on their consumption like everybody else. It would be progressive, just like a negative income tax. But if the rich lived in the Hamptons in a mansion, they'd have to pay taxes on the imputed rent on that house. That's part of their consumption. They had yachts, they'd have to pay taxes on the imputed rent on the yacht. That's all in my proposal. It's a very easy thing to do, to go from our current tax system to a personal progressive consumption cash flow tax. All economists that I know in public finance would favor this over what we have. Get rid of the federal income tax, we could continue having the FICA tax, but take the ceiling off. There's three taxes that I talk about combining that puts everybody in a 30% tax bracket. And then we also have to reform the benefit system as well. And one way you do that is you don't tell poor people, hey, if you earn a penny too much, you're going to lose your Medicaid for yourself and then your kids. You say, everybody's got health care. Here it is. And we're going to pay for it with general revenues. But it's going to be competitive. We're not going to spend 19% of GDP. We're going to spend 11%. This is the way technocrats, economists would get together and say, here's how we fix everything. You can't fix one thing you can't put your finger in the dike here and the water comes out over there. You have to fix the entire system. I mean, think about education. There are simple things you can do just to get our kids up to grade level in reading. Uh, what could you do? You could go to the Department of Education if you're the president, and you could put on there free online courses for grade K through or pre-K through 12th grade. Could have algebra being taught by 5 different of the best, teachers of algebra in the country. They could present in 5 different ways. And then people in the school systems could show those videos to their kids with headsets, so the kids aren't being disrupted by other kids, and spend half the day showing kids online education. We have to think about that as a solution, because right now we have class sizes that are far too big, and the kids are far too distracted by other kids. And now we can go from a class of 35 to a classroom of 1 where the teacher can walk around and help kids. I'm not saying, and if a union doesn't want to do it, they don't have to do it. This unionized school wants to keep giving bad education to their kids, if that's what's going on, then the parents eventually will push back. But the parents would also have the ability to access these videos on the weekend at night with their kids and go through the. So we have to use modern technology. In Cuba, let me just say this: in Cuba, which is a terrible economy and terribly poor and run by a dictator, yet another dictator. So it's a terrible system. But they're doing one thing right, which is they put on the TV in the classroom every day. The kids throughout Cuba see the same math class on TV throughout the entire country. If it's third graders, they have the same education on TV. It's not all day long. They have recess and other things, but it's a part of the day. And they've been doing this for years. And everybody, I think, recognizes that Cubans are very well educated.
Okay. All right. So Larry,
It costs nothing to do this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to come back to the healthcare for a minute. This 8% of GDP that you think could be saved. So obviously somebody's getting that money, that 8%. And so you're saying you're taking it away from them. Who loses the money and what damage is done by that? For example, doctors, hospitals, insurance companies, pharmaceutical manufacturers. Somebody's going to not get 8% of GDP, and what are the consequences?
Well, part of the reason we're spending so much money is we're doing things very inefficiently. So it doesn't if you take if you get rid of the inefficiency, there's a lot of that 8% is inefficiency, like the fact that if you go to Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is allied with Mass General, probably the best hospital system in Massachusetts, maybe in New England, they don't communicate with Tufts Medical System, which is right down the street. They can't talk to each other. There are parts of Mount Auburn Hospital which don't talk to other parts of Mount Auburn Hospital in terms of electronic medical records. So we can make huge strides with electronic medical records, with teamwork, team coordination of medicine, so that you're not seeing 5 different doctors where your GP doesn't know what's going on. They should be talking together about your care, so that things are, you get the best care in a coordinated manner. But we're also paying out the wazoo for drugs. So we need to have countervailing purchasing power. That would happen in a Medicare for all system. And again, it's not the Democratic, not the blue version of Medicare for all. It would be the red version, the version this is the Advantage plan, but it would be a much improved version of the Advantage plan. And it would uh, the Republicans could take credit for giving everybody an excellent healthcare system, but everybody's covered. And now, would there be some people who would have to move out of healthcare into some other occupation if we're only spending 11% rather than 19%? Yes, that transition would take place, but you wouldn't be paying $20,000 for a drug infusion for some. So maybe
Yeah.
it's the pharma, maybe it's the shareholders of pharma, but through time we wouldn't be. We are waste. It's not like it's a redistribution here. It's like 8% of GDP that's being wasted because we're getting 21st best results, paying 8% more. Sweden's getting 4% of best results, paying 8% less.
Yeah. I have another question from Catherine Scott, and I want to wrap it into a question of mine. She asked, what role do you see for the insurance industry? I want to broaden that out into your whole concept of limited purpose banking. You could give people a very high level, not technical idea of what you're talking about there.
Okay, so we have a trust me banking system. So let's say Peter is your bank, and I give him my money. I have some savings, so I give the money to Peter, and then he goes and invests it. And Peter might be Silicon Valley Bank, which failed about a year ago, famously. So when I give Peter the money, he gives me back a checking account, and it's a demand deposit. I can go and ask for my money back at any moment. So this is
Please
like,
don't do that. It's all tied up.
Because it's tied up because you've lent it out, but you're making a promise you can't deliver on in certain states. And that's, right there in the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life. Anybody hasn't seen that movie should see it, with Jimmy Stewart. I wrote a book called Jimmy Stewart is Dead, because Jimmy Stewart, when there was a bank run at the beginning of the movie, got up on the top of this desk in the bank and made a great speech and got everybody to go back home and not ask for their money. And that but here's a different way we could run the financial system, because Peter, we need you to find a good place to invest my money. Okay, you're a financial intermediary, and you're going to collect a lot of people's money and give it to somebody who might need a big chunk of money to do a good project. So the way we can do this is use our other 10,000 banks, which are called mutual funds. So I give you my money, and you could be Fidelity Investments or T. Rowe Price or TIA or any of these companies. All the banks have mutual funds. I give you my money, you give me back shares of ownership shares to the fund that you're running, and then you invest the money. Now, the fund that you're running might be investing in stock. So we have a lot of stock mutual funds. You might be investing in bonds. You might be investing in short-term treasury bills. And that's what's called a money market fund, basically. But you might also be investing in mortgages in a way that I can't come and immediately redeem the money. You might just take the money, lend money to people that are buying homes, and you get the money. As the money comes in, you pay it back to the shareholders like me, but you're not under any obligation to pay anything back on demand. So all these an equity financed mutual fund, you're getting your money by selling shares, not by giving me a promise you can't meet. And therefore, you can never go bankrupt. So the middlemen, the financial intermediaries, the financial sector that's taking in funds and then investing it or lending it out, they can never go under, which is what's happened. What happened in 2008, we had 17 intermediaries or banks or insurance companies or mortgage insurance companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and AIG is the biggest insurance company in the world. They all went under by being leveraged, by taking money, promising to pay it back for sure, under certain conditions, and they weren't able to do it because they invested at risk. But you can run insurance, you can run bank, you can run financial intermediation as mutual funds that are fully equity financed, and we would never have another banking crisis in the world. every 15 years on average since our country was formed, we've had a recession. And most of those recessions, if you look online, are called panic of, crisis of. Obviously, the Great Depression was kicked off by a financial crisis. The market crashed. The Great Recession had a financial, it wasn't called a panic, but the panic of 1909 was called a panic. We've had one financial crisis after another connected with these recessions. And that's because we have a banking system that's built to fail. I want to have it a trust me banking system. It's not a trust me banking system. It's what's called a limited purpose banking system, where it's fully equity financed, and its purpose is limited to not to borrowing and gambling with our money, but taking in our funds and investing it and giving us back shares a week. So if your investments turn sour, I take the hit right away. My shares to your fund drop in value. Okay, so I'm experiencing the risk on the investment side, but I can diversify, but I also won't lose my job. We won't have the entire economy collapse because you and all the other banks like you have gone under. And
Okay.
that's what
Larry, just two things. I have a question from the audience, Mickey Hamill, and a question for myself. Mickey says, do you think banks, etc., should be bailed out with our tax money?
No, I think Franklin Roosevelt was regaling against the banks as gambling with other people's money. That's what they're doing. Insurance companies are as well. They had, but so what I'm proposing is the banks not gambling at all with people's money. They invest the money, and the banks they're not called banks anymore. They're called mutual funds. And we have more mutual funds than we actually have retail banks in this country. We have about 10,000 mutual funds. We have about 4,500 FDIC insured banks, commercial banks in the country. So we are moving gradually in the direction of limited purpose banking, but we need to move there quickly because we could have what happened last year when Silicon Valley Bank went under and Northern Trust went under and Signature Bank went under. They went under very quickly, and that run of uninsured depositors on those banks, they have right now. We've got $17 trillion of deposits in the banking system. 7 of those 17 are uninsured. So, at the end of our podcast, everybody could who's got an uninsured deposit could take it out electronically and move it to a mutual fund, and the banks in our country would collapse, and we would have another major recession. We'd have a depression if they all went under. So we can't keep running our country's economy this way. This is, great for the banks because the banks get the upside. Silicon Valley Bank was making a lot of money, and then they basically, wasn't that they invested so badly, but they were just so highly leveraged that there was a run, and it can happen in an instant. And that's what you see at the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life. And then the government comes and bails them out. So none of the bankers really take a hit. It's the taxpayer takes a hit. That has to end. That can end overnight. So if I were president, I would end that overnight, and we would have a much more efficient banking system, financial system, and it would never fail.
We have only about 5 minutes left, so please get your questions in while there's still time. Larry, on the checking accounts, how would money be invested if people needed instant liquidity the way they have with a checking account?
So people would have, I would have, let's say I'm just an investor or a citizen who has some money that I've saved. I would buy stock mutual funds from you. I would buy bond mutual funds. I would buy a cash mutual fund where I would put my money with you. You give me back shares. And what you would do with a cash mutual fund is just hold cash in reserve with the Federal Reserve. And you'd give me a debit card, and I could use that for my transactions. It would just be like a checking account where you haven't taken that money and lent it to somebody. That was called 100%. That was a narrow
100%
banking.
reserve. Yeah.
That was 100% reserve banking,
Yeah.
banking. So narrow banking is a small part of limited purpose banking, and that was proposed by Milton Friedman, but Irving Fisher during the Great Depression, Frank Knight at Chicago. So that they thought you could fix the entire problem that way, but the problem is much bigger. The problem has to be with the leverage that the financial system is engaged in, not just through checking accounts, but through the entire operation. You could be selling me a bond, not taking in selling me a checking account, and you're leveraged. I want you not to be leveraged, Peter. I want you to be fully equity financed. Like think about this, 10,000 mutual funds back in 2008. We had 3,000 that were leveraged. They were the money market funds who promised to back the deposits to the dollar. They were leveraged. They went under. The other 7,000 that were equity financed, that were the kind that I'm talking about, they were limited purpose banks in effect. None of them had gotten into any trouble, in the sense none of them went under. So we had this financial crisis, and we had Barney Frank, the representative from Massachusetts, head of the Senate, the House Financial Services Committee, and Senator Chris Dodd from Connecticut, and they put together this reformed Dodd-Frank, and it basically rebuilt these houses that had collapsed, rebuilt them, that were built out of straw. A big wind knocks them down. They rebuild them out of straw. Barney Frank goes off to become a member of the board of Signature Bank. This is what happened. This is corruption, okay? And if you look at the contributors to the Financial Services House Financial Services Committee, every one of those members is getting a huge amount of campaign contributions from Wall Street. So this is why we have a perpetuation of a system that's producing every 15 years on average a financial crisis, an economic crisis, as well as a financial crisis. So we need to fix that for good. Somebody needs to talk. And by the way, I just want to say one last thing. I know I'm running over here, but I'm pushing out a lot of ideas here, but I've talked to lots of economists on each of these issues, including limited purpose banking. And there's tons of support by economists for each of these proposals. They're not just my proposal. They're basically collective views of economists who actually think beyond their narrow academic focus, which very few do, but some do. The better ones do.
Very good. We've been speaking with Laurence Kotlikoff of Boston University, talking about his purple agenda for the next 4 years. And I want to thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going to hand it back over to Jenny Wilson.
Thanks, Peter. Peter and Larry, thank you both for sharing your valuable perspectives with the Network for Responsible Public Policy audience tonight. We'll be back on September 25th with an important discussion on elections. Watch your email for a brief survey on tonight's program. Your input helps shape future programs. Also, please sign up for our newsletter on our website. Thank you, and see you on September 25th. Good night. Thanks, Larry and Peter.
Thank you. Bye.